Logan Harrington had spent decades building a leading name in aviation. Today, he was about to discover just how high or how low his airline truly soared. The CEO of Horizon Skies Airlines, one of the most prominent carriers in the world, quietly took a seat in economy class. No entourage, no VIP treatment. He blended seamlessly with the other passengers, who paid him no mind. That was precisely what he wanted. For months, whispers of declining service, disheartened employees, and a toxic culture beneath the polished exterior had reached Logan's ears. His executive team assured him there was nothing to worry about. But Logan, a self-made entrepreneur who built Horizon Skies from scratch, trusted his instincts over reports. Something wasn't right. He decided to investigate the truth for himself. Under a pseudonym and with a last-minute booking, he boarded this flight in the simplest seat possible. He needed to see the experience from a passenger's perspective. What he didn't realize was that this one flight would change everything. Logan had barely settled into his seat when a quiet, trembling voice drifted from behind him. "I can't believe this is happening. I should have been there sooner." The words were faint, but the emotion behind them was palpable. Fear, urgency, and a sense of helplessness. Logan wasn't one to eavesdrop, but this wasn't idle chatter. He turned his head slightly. The voice belonged to a young woman, early 20s, clutching her phone with a grip so tight her knuckles whitened. Her tear-streaked face bore the strain of anguish. Another voice, older and steadier, responded with gentle reassurance. "You're doing all you can. No one can ask more than that." Logan's curiosity deepened. The young woman was Emily Rowe, a 25-year-old traveling at the last minute after learning her father had suffered a severe stroke that morning. The ticket had drained her savings due to last-minute price surges. Her anxiety was palpable, her red-rimmed eyes fixed on her phone as if willing it to deliver a miracle. The older voice belonged to Peter Sandoval, a retired firefighter in his early 60s. He was flying alone for the first time in decades, the seat beside him conspicuously empty, the spot his late wife once filled. Grieving and out of his element, Peter fumbled awkwardly with the customs forms she used to handle with ease. "She always did this part," he murmured, embarrassed. Although Emily and Peter were strangers, their shared vulnerability had drawn them together. Logan clenched his jaw. Horizon Skies was supposed to make travel easier, especially for people facing hardships. If this was the reality of his airline service, then the problems were far greater than he had feared. Just as Logan was sinking into these thoughts, he noticed something, or rather, someone, who caught his attention. Amid the bustling cabin preparations, a poised and calm flight attendant moved through the aisle. Her name tag read, Claire Mitchell. Claire, in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled neatly back, exuded genuine care and authority. Unlike some of her peers, she didn't rush through her tasks or treat passengers like a checklist. She stopped at row 14, where Emily and Peter sat, her demeanor calm and intentional. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she asked Emily gently, her sharp eyes softening as she noticed the younger woman's distress. Emily hesitated, but found herself responding to the quiet kindness in Claire's tone. "My dad, he had a stroke this morning. I'm trying to get to him." Many attendants might offer a polite, "I'm sorry to hear that," before moving on. But Claire wasn't like most. She adjusted Emily's seat for extra comfort and leaned closer. "Let me know if you need anything, okay?" she said sincerely. Moments later, as if reading Emily's mind, Claire discreetly returned with a hot tea, gratis, and a few tissues. Then Claire turned her attention to Peter. She noticed his unease with the forms in front of him. "Need help with those?" she asked warmly. Peter hesitated. My wife used to handle all this. I just signed where she told me." Claire didn't laugh or rush him. Instead, she knelt slightly and patiently walked him through the paperwork step by step. For most, these gestures might seem small, but to Logan, they were a revelation. This was what exemplary service looked like: attentive, compassionate, and human. Unfortunately, not everyone shared Claire's values. Claire came a sharp voice from the aisle, cutting through the moment like a blade. "Stop babysitting passengers." Logan glanced up to see Beverly Grant, the senior flight attendant overseeing the cabin crew. In her late 40s, Beverly carried herself with rigid authority and an air of condescension. "Passengers come and go," Beverly muttered under her breath as she passed. You waste time on every sob story, and you'll never get ahead in this business. Claire stiffened but said nothing, resuming her work with quiet grace. Logan, however, felt his frustration boil. If this was the culture brewing among his senior staff, Horizon Skies had more than a service problem. It had a leadership problem. Logan resolved to keep observing. This was just the beginning. Claire Mitchell took a steady breath, forcing herself to keep moving through the cabin. Beverly Grant's harsh words echoed in her ears, but Claire refused to let them distract her. She continued assisting passengers, treating each interaction with her characteristic warmth and care. Though she knew her actions wouldn't win her favor with management, she couldn't bring herself to care about the politics. Logan Harrington, however, noticed everything. He observed how Claire remained dedicated to helping passengers despite the dismissive attitude of her senior colleagues. Beverly and the other senior staff paid no attention to economy passengers, reserving their polished smiles only for the first-class cabin. But thanks to Claire's kindness, both Emily Rowe and Peter Sandoval felt a little less alone during their flight. By the time the plane landed, Logan had seen enough. He wouldn't reveal his identity just yet. This wasn't the time or place, but he had already made a decision. As he stepped off the aircraft and walked through the terminal, blending into the crowd of passengers, one thought dominated his mind. Claire Mitchell was more than just a flight attendant. She was a leader being overlooked, and soon everyone would know it. Logan also realized something far more troubling. His airline had a problem, a deep, systemic one that threatened its very integrity. Horizon Skies had become a place where genuine leadership and compassion were treated as weaknesses. Logan had seen this before in other companies, toxic cultures that rewarded arrogance and punished integrity. He had vowed long ago never to let his airline become one of them, which is why, instead of heading home after his flight, Logan went straight to Horizon Skies headquarters. That night, he was determined to uncover the truth. Logan's office occupied the 42nd floor of Horizon Tower, a sleek glass building that loomed over the city skyline. Normally, his presence in the building after hours would have been unusual. But tonight, with only a skeleton crew working late, he moved through the quiet halls unnoticed. He didn't want anyone to know what he was about to do, not yet. Once in his executive suite, Logan logged into his private system and began digging into the personnel files. He started with Claire Mitchell. What he found made his stomach turn. Claire had been with Horizon Skies for nearly a decade. Her file was impeccable, glowing passenger feedback, a perfect record with no complaints, and consistently high performance ratings. And yet, Claire had never been promoted. Logan scrolled further and found several rejected promotion requests. Each time she applied for a higher position, the same feedback appeared in her file. Not leadership material. Too soft. Lacks authority. Too soft. Logan frowned. He had just witnessed Claire handle an emotional young woman and a grieving widower with more grace and professionalism than most executives. She wasn't soft. She was compassionate and effective. Why, then, was she repeatedly denied advancement? Logan found his answer in the list of names tied to her rejected applications. One name stood out repeatedly: Beverly Grant. The same senior flight attendant who had dismissed Claire's actions during the flight was also one of the key figures blocking her promotions. And Beverly wasn't acting alone. Logan noticed a pattern. A small group of senior attendants, including Beverly, had been systematically promoting their own friends while leaving dedicated employees like Claire stuck in dead-end roles. It wasn't just incompetence. It was deliberate suppression of talent. Logan's anger deepened as he continued his investigation. He pulled up the latest performance review records for all flight attendants. Claire's name was conspicuously absent. According to company policy, every employee was required to have an annual evaluation, yet Claire's last review was from 2 years ago. Further digging revealed that the missing reviews hadn't been overlooked, they had been deliberately erased. This wasn't office politics. This was corruption. Logan clenched his fists. If the official records were being manipulated, he needed more information from someone who had seen the system from the inside. He reached for his phone and dialed an old contact. "Logan, do you realize it's almost midnight?" Miles Vickers, a retired flight supervisor, answered groggily, but with a hint of curiosity. I need information, Logan said without preamble. Miles sighed, recognizing the urgency in Logan's tone. What's this about? What can you tell me about Claire Mitchell? Logan asked. Miles hesitated, then spoke carefully. She's one of the best attendants I've ever worked with. Passengers adore her. Other crew members look up to her. But, Logan pressed. She's been stuck in the same position for years, Miles admitted. Beverly Grant and her inner circle don't like her. She doesn't play the game. Logan's voice hardened. What game? Miles sighed again, his tone heavy. The promotion game. At Horizon Skies, it's not about merit. It's about being in the right clique. Beverly and her crew have been running the show for years. If they don't like you, you're going nowhere, no matter how good you are. Logan's anger simmered. He had built Horizon Skies to be a company of integrity, but somewhere along the way, that integrity had been lost. Worse still, no one had told him. Thank you, Miles, Logan said grimly, ending the call. Just as Logan was processing this revelation, his phone buzzed again. It was his assistant, Miriam. Sir, Miriam began hesitantly, I wasn't sure whether to bother you this late, but you just received 2 important calls. From who? Logan asked. First, from Henry Rowe, the investment tycoon. Logan's eyebrows rose. Henry Rowe, Emily's father, was considering a major partnership with Horizon Skies that could generate millions in revenue. And the second? A retired firefighter named Peter Sandoval, Miriam continued. Apparently, he's very respected in his community. He recommended Horizon Skies for an exclusive travel contract for emergency responders. Logan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. 2 major business opportunities had emerged, both directly tied to passengers Claire had helped. She hadn't just provided exceptional service. Her compassion had created ripple effects that could benefit the entire company. And yet, she had been undervalued and ignored. Logan stood, his resolve solidifying. He was done observing. Now, it was time to act. Miles Vickers sighed, the wariness in his voice heavy. It's all politics, Logan. Promotions at Horizon Skies aren't based on merit. They're based on who's in the in crowd. Beverly Grant and her circle have been running the system their way for years. If they don't like someone, it doesn't matter how good they are, they're blocked. Logan Harrington felt a slow, simmering anger build in his chest. He had built Horizon Skies to be a company rooted in integrity, a place where hard work and talent were rewarded. Somewhere along the way, that vision had been corrupted, and no one had told him. Before Logan could respond, his phone rang again. It was his assistant, Miriam. Sir, she said cautiously, I know it's late, but you've just received 2 important calls. Logan pressed his temple. Who are they from? First, Henry Rowe, Miriam said, her tone shifting slightly with the weight of the name. Logan's eyebrows rose. Henry Rowe, a billionaire investor, was considering a major partnership with Horizon Skies, a deal that could bring millions in revenue. And the second call? A retired firefighter named Peter Sandoval, Miriam replied. He's very well respected in the firefighter community. He's recommending Horizon Skies for an exclusive travel contract for emergency responders. Logan's hand tightened on the phone. 2 significant opportunities, both directly tied to passengers Claire Mitchell had helped. She hadn't just provided excellent service. Her kindness had unknowingly led to potential financial gains for the company. Yet, she had been overlooked and undervalued. Logan's jaw set. Enough was enough. By sunrise, Logan was back in his corporate office. The night's revelations had solidified his resolve. He wasted no time scheduling an emergency leadership meeting, a mandatory gathering for all senior crew members, executives, and HR staff. As the plans unfolded, Logan instructed the HR department to compile a list of overlooked employees, those who had been unfairly passed over for promotions. At the top of that list, Claire Mitchell. He also ordered a full audit of past performance reviews and promotions. Beverly Grant and her circle had been running things their way for far too long, and Logan intended to hold them accountable. As he sipped his morning coffee, a determined smile crept across his face. Claire Mitchell had no idea her world was about to change. As Logan replayed the events of his flight in his mind, he walked the halls of Horizon Tower, blending into the background of bustling employees. He thought of how Claire's compassion had transformed the experiences of 2 passengers. Emily, a young woman racing to her father's side, and Peter, a grieving widower navigating a world without his wife. Claire's actions weren't just about doing her job. She had made a difference in people's lives, yet Beverly had treated her kindness like a liability. Logan had seen this toxic mindset before. Corporate cultures that rewarded arrogance and punished authenticity. He refused to let Horizon Skies fall into that trap. Logan reached his executive suite, the highest floor of the sleek skyscraper that symbolized the company's success. Normally, his presence in the building so early would raise questions, but not today. Today, he wanted privacy. He logged into the company's personnel system and pulled up Claire Mitchell's records. What he found only deepened his anger. Claire's profile was exemplary. Nearly a decade of service, flawless passenger feedback, no complaints, and consistently high performance ratings. Yet, every time she applied for a promotion, she was rejected with the same excuse: not leadership material, too soft, lacks authority. Logan shook his head. He had just watched Claire demonstrate leadership on that flight, offering empathy, solving problems, and treating passengers with dignity. She was a natural leader. So why had she been denied every opportunity to advance? The answer lay in the names attached to her rejected applications. Beverly Grant's name appeared over and over, along with a few others in her clique. They had systematically blocked Claire while promoting their own friends, many of whom were far less qualified. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate suppression of talent. Logan's fury deepened as he continued investigating. He found that Claire's most recent performance review, required annually by company policy, was from 2 years ago. Further digging revealed the reason. Her evaluations hadn't been forgotten. They had been deleted. This wasn't office politics. This was corruption. Logan clenched his fists. If records were being erased, then someone was actively sabotaging Claire's career. He needed to hear more from someone who understood the inner workings of the system. He picked up his phone and dialed Miles Vickers again. Miles answered groggily but with a note of curiosity. "Logan, what's going on?" "I need more information," Logan said firmly. "Tell me everything about Beverly Grant's circle." Miles sighed heavily. "It's a mess, Logan. Promotions aren't based on skill anymore. It's all about being in the right group. Beverly and her team have been running things like their personal kingdom for years. If you're not part of their inner circle, you're out of luck." Logan's tone sharpened. "How has this gone unchecked for so long?" "People are afraid to speak up," Miles admitted. "They worry about retaliation. And honestly, most executives don't look past the surface. Beverly and her team keep things looking polished enough to avoid scrutiny." Logan's grip on the phone tightened. This was exactly the kind of rot he had promised himself he would never allow in his company. "Thanks, Miles," Logan said, his voice calm but firm. As he ended the call, Logan's phone buzzed with a new message from Miriam. "Sir," she said, "everything is in place for the meeting." Logan took a deep breath. The toxic culture festering in Horizon Skies had gone unnoticed for too long. Today, that was going to change. Logan Harrington stared at his computer screen, his expression dark. Claire Mitchell's name was glaringly absent from the latest performance review records. By company policy, every flight attendant was required to have an annual evaluation, but her last recorded review was over 2 years ago. The missing evaluations hadn't been overlooked, they had been deleted. This was more than negligence. It was a deliberate effort to erase her accomplishments and ensure she remained overlooked. Logan clenched his fists. If official records were being manipulated, this wasn't just office politics. It was personal sabotage. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Logan picked up his phone and called Miles Vickers. Miles answered groggily, clearly startled by the late-night call. "Logan? You do know it's nearly midnight, right?" "I need answers, Miles," Logan said bluntly. "What do you know about Claire Mitchell?" There was a pause, and then Miles sighed. "Claire? She's one of the best we've ever had. Passengers love her, and so do her colleagues. But she's stuck." "What do you mean, stuck?" Logan pressed. "She's been in the same role for years," Miles admitted. "Beverly Grant and her crew don't like her. She doesn't play the game." Logan's tone hardened. "What game?" "The promotion game," Miles said, his voice heavy with frustration. "At Horizon Skies, it's not about merit. It's about being in the right circle. Beverly and her team have been running things their way for years. If you're not part of their clique, you don't move up. no matter how good you are. Logan felt a slow burn of anger rise within him. He had built Horizon Skies to be a company of integrity, but somewhere along the way, that integrity had been lost. "Thanks, Miles," Logan said, ending the call. Logan's phone buzzed again moments later. His assistant, Miriam, sounded hesitant on the other end of the line. "Sir, I wasn't sure if I should disturb you this late, but you just received 2 important calls," she said. Logan rubbed his temple. "Who are they from?" "The first is from Henry Rowe," Miriam said, "the billionaire investor." Logan sat up straighter. Henry Rowe was considering a major partnership with Horizon Skies, a deal that could bring in millions. "And the second?" "A retired firefighter named Peter Sandoval," Miriam continued. "He's highly respected in his community and has recommended Horizon Skies for an exclusive travel contract for emergency responders." Logan exhaled slowly, his thoughts racing. 2 major business opportunities, both directly linked to passengers Claire had helped. She hadn't just provided excellent service. Her kindness had created ripple effects with significant financial implications for the company. And yet, she had been undervalued and ignored. Enough was enough. By sunrise, Logan was already in his office, finalizing his plan of action. He had spent the entire night reviewing employee records, cross-referencing promotions, and confirming the details of the toxic leadership system that had been festering under his nose. He instructed Miriam to send out an urgent, company-wide email. Mandatory meeting. All senior crew members, HR executives, and corporate leadership were to report to the main conference room immediately. The email spread like wildfire through the company. Tension filled the air as employees whispered and speculated. Everyone knew one thing: when the CEO called an emergency meeting, something big was about to happen. Beverly Grant strolled into the conference room with her usual air of arrogance, smirking as she whispered to Greg Taylor, another senior flight attendant in her circle. "This better not be about those ridiculous complaints," Beverly muttered. "Some of us actually have flights to run." Greg chuckled. "Probably just another one of those boring corporate updates." Neither of them noticed Logan Harrington standing at the head of the conference table, silently observing them. One by one, the room filled with HR directors, executives, senior flight attendants, and training supervisors. At the very back of the room, Claire Mitchell slipped in quietly, sitting near the corner. She had no idea this meeting was about her. When the room was full, Logan cleared his throat, instantly silencing the murmurs. He began pacing slowly, his voice calm but dangerously firm. "I took a flight yesterday," he said. The room grew still, tension thickening. "An unannounced undercover flight in economy class," Logan continued. "Do you know what I saw?" He paused, scanning the faces in the room. "I saw a young woman racing to her father's side after a stroke, struggling with last-minute fees that shouldn't have been charged. I saw a grieving widower navigating his first trip alone, confused and unsupported. And I saw a flight attendant who went above and beyond to treat passengers with kindness and dignity, while her own colleagues mocked her for it." Logan's piercing gaze landed on Beverly, who shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "You were on that flight, weren't you, Beverly?" Logan asked. Beverly's face paled. Yes, sir, but—" "You called her too soft," Logan interrupted coldly. "You told her she'd never advance if she kept babysitting passengers." Beverly opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Logan turned toward the back of the room, locking eyes with Claire. "Claire Mitchell," he said, motioning for her to stand. Claire hesitated, startled, but obeyed. She stood near the front of the room, her heart pounding. Logan addressed the group, his voice resolute. "This woman has been one of the best employees at Horizon Skies," he said, pointing to Claire. "And yet, for nearly a decade, she has been ignored, dismissed, and actively blocked from promotions." He gestured to the HR team. "Show her file." On the large screen at the front of the room, Claire's glowing feedback, perfect record, and rejected promotion requests appeared. Gasps filled the room. Logan continued. "And who denied her promotions?" "Beverly Grant and her circle." He turned to Beverly, his voice sharp. "Care to explain why?" Beverly stammered. "Well, not everyone is cut out for leadership." Logan leaned forward. "Yet you promoted underqualified people with disciplinary issues over her. Why?" Silence. Logan turned back to Claire. Effective immediately, Claire Mitchell is promoted to Director of Passenger Experience. She will oversee customer service for the entire airline. The room erupted in murmurs, Beverly's face turning crimson with rage. Logan's voice cut through the noise. "And Beverly Grant, you're fired. Greg Taylor, you're fired." Gasps echoed again. "This company will no longer tolerate corruption, favoritism, or mediocrity," Logan declared. "A full audit of promotions and performance reviews will begin immediately. Anyone found guilty of similar behavior will face the same consequences." Claire stood frozen, trying to process the moment. Logan turned to her and softened his tone. "You've earned this. You're going to help us rebuild this company." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, not from sadness, but from finally being seen. As the meeting ended, a new chapter for Horizon Skies began. At the back of the room, Claire Mitchell quietly entered and took a seat in the corner. She went unnoticed by most, unaware that the meeting she had been summoned to was entirely about her. When the room was packed, Logan Harrington stepped forward. The murmuring among the attendees stopped instantly as everyone turned their attention to him. For a moment, there was silence. Then, in a calm but cutting tone, Logan began. "I took a flight yesterday." The room grew even quieter and tension filled the air. Logan continued, his voice dangerously smooth. "An unannounced undercover flight in economy class." Whispers broke out among the attendees. Beverly Grant and Greg Taylor exchanged nervous glances. "You know what I saw?" Logan asked, pacing slowly. "I saw a young woman trying desperately to reach her dying father, unfairly charged excessive last-minute fees. I saw a widowed man on his first flight alone in decades, completely lost and receiving no help from the crew. And I saw a flight attendant who went above and beyond to treat passengers with dignity and kindness, while her own colleagues mocked her for it." Logan stopped and turned to Beverly, his piercing gaze landing squarely on her. "You were on that flight, weren't you, Beverly?" Beverly's face paled. Yes, sir, but—" "You called her too soft," Logan interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You said she'd never move up if she kept babysitting passengers." Beverly froze, her mouth opening and closing with no words coming out. The room was utterly silent. Logan turned his attention to the back of the room, where Claire sat, her heart pounding. "Claire Mitchell," Logan said, motioning for her to stand. "Please, come up here." Claire hesitated, uncertain and overwhelmed, but she obeyed, walking to the front of the room. In front of everyone, Logan did something no one expected. He turned to the HR director, a nervous woman named Denise. "Give me her full record," Logan commanded. Denise hurriedly pulled up Claire's personnel file on the large screen at the front of the room. The data that appeared left the entire room stunned. Years of glowing passenger feedback, 0 complaints, multiple rejected promotion requests, all denied by Beverly Grant and Greg Taylor, missing performance reviews that had been deliberately erased. Logan pointed to the screen. "This woman," he said firmly, "is one of the best employees this airline has ever had. And yet, for nearly a decade, she has been ignored, dismissed, and actively blocked from promotions." He turned back to Beverly and Greg, his voice sharp. "You both personally rejected her applications. Care to explain why?" Beverly stammered. "Well, sir, not everyone is cut out for leadership." Logan leaned forward, his gaze icy. "And yet you promoted multiple underqualified people over her, including some with disciplinary issues. Why?" Beverly's face turned crimson, and Greg shrank back in his seat. Denise nervously cleared her throat. "Sir, I was just following recommendations from senior staff." Logan's cold gaze turned to her. "So you allowed favoritism to dictate promotions instead of merit?" Denise swallowed hard and said nothing. Claire, still standing at the front, looked utterly overwhelmed. She had never imagined this day would come. Logan took a deep breath and addressed the room. "I won't tolerate corruption in my company," he declared. "This ends today." Then, Logan delivered the final bombshell. "I reviewed Claire Mitchell's actions on that flight," he said. "She displayed every quality of a true leader: compassion, quick thinking, problem-solving, and professionalism." He turned to Claire, his voice softening slightly. "So I'm making an executive decision." The entire room held its breath. "Effective immediately," Logan announced, "Claire Mitchell is promoted to Head of Passenger Experience, a brand new role where she will oversee customer service policies for the entire airline." A stunned silence filled the room. Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. Beverly sputtered in rage. "This is ridiculous. You can't." Logan turned to her, his voice cold and final. "You're fired, Beverly." Beverly's mouth dropped open in shock. Greg tried to stand, visibly furious, but Logan's voice stopped him. "You too, Greg," Logan said sharply. Gasps rippled through the room. Logan continued, "HR will be conducting a full audit of every promotion from the past 5 years. Any evidence of favoritism or corruption will result in termination." Claire stood frozen, struggling to process what had just happened. Logan turned to her, his tone soft and reassuring. "You deserve this. You've earned it." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, not from sadness, but from finally being seen. As the meeting ended, Beverly and Greg were escorted out of the building, their reign of favoritism officially over. Employees whispered in awe and respect, and Claire, the once overlooked flight attendant, had risen above the toxic system that had tried to keep her down. She turned to Logan as the room cleared. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Logan gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Just do your job, Claire. I have a feeling you're going to make this airline better than ever." And with that, Horizon Skies entered a new era, one where true talent was finally rewarded. It all began with one undercover flight. Claire Mitchell had spent weeks transforming Horizon Skies Airlines from the inside out. Unfair policies were dismantled, passengers were treated with dignity, and silenced employees were finally finding their voices. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Deep within the company, unseen adversaries were lying in wait, ready to strike back. Claire was sitting in her office when her assistant, Jenna Hayes, rushed in, holding a printed email with no sender information. "You need to see this," Jenna said, her voice tense. Claire took the paper and read the chilling message. To Claire Mitchell, head of passenger experience, "You think you're fixing Horizon Skies, but you're just making enemies. You don't belong in leadership, and soon you'll be out. Watch your back." Claire's stomach dropped. She reread the message twice, analyzing every word. The tone was bitter, the quotes around her title implying sarcasm and disdain. The threat was vague, but unmistakably real. Someone inside Horizon Skies wanted her gone. Logan Harrington had warned her about this. "When you try to change a broken system," he'd said, "the people who benefited from it will fight back." He had been right. 2 days later, the first sign of sabotage surfaced. Claire was in a boardroom with Logan and other executives, presenting her next round of reforms. "This phase will introduce a passenger-first training program for all employees," she explained, clicking to the next slide on the projector. But instead of the training manual, something shocking appeared. The screen displayed a fake email, doctored to look like Claire had been bribing employees for positive reviews. The room erupted into murmurs. Logan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the screen. "This is a lie," Logan said sharply. Claire stiffened but forced herself to stay calm. "I've never written that email," she said firmly. "Someone has fabricated this to discredit me." Logan nodded. "Cybersecurity," he called. "Trace the source immediately." Whoever had orchestrated this had underestimated who they were dealing with. That night, Claire received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, but answered. A deep, nervous voice spoke. "You're in danger. Meet me in the employee parking garage, level 3. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Claire exhaled slowly, weighing her options. It could be a trap, or it could be a whistleblower with valuable information. She wasn't going to take the risk alone. She called Logan. 15 minutes later, Claire and Logan stood together in the dimly lit parking garage, waiting. The sound of footsteps echoed in the stillness. A man in his mid-50s wearing a worn pilot's jacket emerged from the shadows. "Captain Harris Weston," Logan said, recognizing him immediately. Harris had been with Horizon Skies for over 20 years. "What's this about?" Claire asked, her voice steady despite the tension. Harris glanced around nervously, ensuring they were alone. "You were set up," he said finally. "That fake email, it was planted by someone high up." Claire's pulse quickened. "Who?" she demanded. Harris hesitated, then muttered 2 names, Denise Parker and Charles Redding. Claire froze. Denise Parker, the HR director who had been in charge during Beverly Grant's reign, and Charles Redding, a senior executive who had been conspicuously silent during recent leadership changes. It all clicked. Denise and Charles were still trying to control the company from behind the scenes. Logan crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "All right," he said, his tone calm but lethal. "Here's what we're going to do." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What kind of plan?" Logan smirked. "A meeting where they think they've won." 3 days later, Denise and Charles walked into a private boardroom, their smugness palpable. They believed Claire had been summoned to explain herself, and they were ready to capitalize on the moment. Instead, they found Logan waiting for them. "Take a seat," Logan said coolly. As soon as they sat, Logan pressed a button on his laptop. A hidden recording played over the speakers. It was Harris Weston's voice, clear and undeniable. He had secretly recorded a conversation where Denise and Charles discussed framing Claire with the fake email. Denise's face went pale, and Charles stammered, This is taken out of context." Logan stood, placing his hands on the table and leaning forward. "Denise, Charles, you have two options." Denise swallowed hard. "What are they?" Logan's expression turned ice cold. "Option 1, you resign immediately, quietly walk away, and this doesn't go public." "And option 2, Charles asked, his voice shaking. "I expose everything," Logan said sharply. "The fake evidence, the corruption, the promotion bribes, and trust me, you will not walk away clean." The room was silent. Denise and Charles didn't even hesitate. Within the hour, they resigned. By the end of the week, Denise and Charles were gone. Logan launched a full investigation into past promotion fraud, ensuring employees who had been wronged finally received justice. For Claire, it was a deeply personal victory. She had fought against the very people who had tried to undermine her for years, and she had won. As she sat in her office, exhausted but triumphant, Logan walked in. "You did well, Claire," he said. She chuckled, shaking her head. "I feel like I've been through a war." Logan smiled, but his expression turned serious. "You've earned your place here, but the biggest test is still ahead." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Logan handed her a file. Inside were documents outlining an upcoming corporate merger. "They want to shut down your department," Logan said gravely. Claire's blood ran cold. Her fight wasn't over, not yet. Claire Mitchell sat in her office, exhausted but triumphant. She had fought against those who had tried to silence her for years and won. As she leaned back in her chair, Logan Harrington entered. "You did good, Mitchell," he said with a small smile. Claire chuckled. "I feel like I just survived a war." Logan's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "You've earned your place here," he said, "but your biggest challenge is still ahead." Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Logan handed her a file. Inside were documents detailing an impending corporate deal, a merger between Horizon Skies and another airline. "They want to shut down your department," Logan said. Claire's blood ran cold. Horizon Skies was on the verge of merging with Titan Atlantic Airways, a larger, profit-driven airline. The merger threatened to erase everything Claire had built. The reforms that empowered employees, the culture of fairness, and the restored trust of passengers. Titan Atlantic's leadership had no interest in passenger-focused policies. Their focus was maximizing revenue, even at the expense of service quality. If the merger went through as planned, it would mean the end of Claire's role and a return to the toxic system she had just dismantled. But Claire wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The next morning, Titan Atlantic's executives arrived at Horizon Skies headquarters to finalize the terms of the merger. At the head of their team was Victor Langley, a shrewd businessman notorious for gutting departments that didn't align with his profit-driven strategies. Claire wasn't invited to the meeting, but that didn't stop her. As Victor and his team settled into the largest conference room, Claire walked in unannounced. Her unshaken confidence silenced the low whispers from the gathered executives. Logan, who had been expecting her, smirked. "Ah, Miss Mitchell?" Victor said, barely glancing up from his papers. "I don't believe you were scheduled to attend." Claire calmly took a seat. "I believe this merger directly impacts my work," she said, "and I'd like to understand what happens to my department under your leadership." Victor folded his hands, his expression neutral but his tone condescending. "We've reviewed your role," he said, "and while your efforts in passenger experience have been admirable, they don't align with our financial goals." Claire's expression didn't waver. "So you plan to eliminate my department?" Victor gave a thin smile. "It's not personal," he said. "It's just business." Logan, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "That's interesting," he said with a deliberate tone, "because I just got off the phone with Henry Rowe and Peter Sandoval." The room fell silent. Henry Rowe, the billionaire investor considering a partnership with Horizon Skies, and Peter Sandoval, the retired firefighter advocating for an exclusive travel contract for emergency responders. Two major financial opportunities for the airline, both tied directly to Claire's work. Logan leaned forward, his tone sharp. Mr. Rowe and Mr. Sandoval both made something very clear. They're only interested in working with us because of the new passenger experience policies we've implemented. Victor Langley frowned, his confident demeanor slipping. "These deals," Logan continued, "are worth millions in long-term revenue, and the only reason they're happening is because of the changes Claire Mitchell has made." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Executives exchanged glances, realizing that the merger wasn't as straightforward as they had assumed. Victor forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, "we can always implement a version of those policies ourselves." "No, you can't," Claire interrupted. All eyes turned to her. Claire stood, unshaken. "You can't fake what we've built," she said, her voice steady and firm. "You can't force flight attendants to genuinely care about passengers. You can't manufacture the trust we've rebuilt with customers." She met Victor's cold stare and added, "And if you erase my department, those deals will disappear. The people who trust Horizon Skies won't trust you." Logan smirked and placed a signed contract on the table. "I just received official confirmation from Henry Rowe," he announced. "He's investing $50 million into Horizon Skies on the condition that Claire Mitchell remains head of passenger experience." Victor's face darkened as the weight of the situation sank in. The executives murmured among themselves, and a few began whispering to Victor, their loyalty shifting. Claire's confidence had turned the tide. By the end of the meeting, the merger was restructured. Titan Atlantic's executives reluctantly agreed to preserve Claire's department and prioritize the passenger-first policies she had implemented. Claire's role was not only secure, it was expanded, giving her greater authority to oversee operations and ensure that her reforms were protected. Victor Langley's attempt to sideline her had failed, and Horizon Skies had taken another step toward a brighter, fairer future. As the meeting adjourned, Logan turned to Claire. "You were brilliant in there," he said with a grin. Claire allowed herself a small smile. "I'm not done yet," she replied. And she wasn't. The fight to protect Horizon Skies and everything she had built was far from over. Victor Langley, visibly rattled, finally adjusted his tie and exhaled slowly. "Well," he said through clenched teeth, "I suppose we should reevaluate our strategy." By the end of the week, the terms of the merger were restructured. Horizon Skies Airlines would retain Claire Mitchell's department, ensuring that passenger experience remained a cornerstone of the company's operations. But the changes didn't stop there. Claire's role was expanded, giving her even greater authority to oversee airline operations. New leadership policies were implemented to prevent another Beverly Grant-style regime from ever taking root again. Employees across the airline celebrated the news. For the first time in years, they felt seen, valued, and hopeful about the future. As for Claire, she finally felt like she belonged. A few days later, Claire received an unexpected email. From Logan Harrington to Claire Mitchell. Subject: a well-deserved promotion. "Claire, your work hasn't just saved this company, it's transformed it. I can't imagine Horizon Skies without you. Effective immediately, I am promoting you to Vice President of Passenger Relations. Welcome to the executive team. Logan Harrington." Claire stared at the screen, stunned. After years of being told she wasn't leadership material, she was now one of the most influential leaders in the airline industry. A week later, Claire walked through a bustling airport terminal, watching the employees and passengers interact. She smiled as she saw a flight attendant helping an elderly couple check in, a customer service agent assisting a nervous first-time flyer, and a pilot chatting with passengers before takeoff, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. This was the airline she had fought for. As she turned a corner, Claire noticed a familiar face. It was Peter Sandoval, the retired firefighter she had helped on Logan's undercover flight. He was boarding a plane with his daughter, who was smiling beside him. Peter noticed Claire and stopped in his tracks, grinning. "Miss Mitchell," he said warmly. Didn't expect to see you here. Claire returned the smile. I work here. Peter chuckled. I guess you do. His daughter nudged him. Dad, we should go. Don't want to be late. Peter nodded, but turned back to Claire one last time. Thank you, he said simply. For what? Claire asked. For everything, Peter replied. With that, he boarded his flight, leaving Claire standing there with a smile on her face. She knew in that moment that she had truly made a difference. And for Claire Mitchell, this was just the beginning.